Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another incredible episode, just like always. So we are going to get right into it. And so most of these weeks, I've been talking about white pills for Trump, about why he's going to win, about how there's no chance he's not going to lose. And I still believe that. I still think he's going to win. But there is a chance that he could lose, and I think it's worth exploring how he might lose and what factors may cause him to lose. And just as an experiment to show what is going wrong with the GOP, what's going wrong with some of the messaging. It's not so much messaging, it's more structural factors that, and almost things beyond Republicans' control, that could be responsible for them losing, for Trump losing in 2024 in November. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I know some people may be upset. They're like, no, we want only white pills. We only want white pills. Well, I think the ultimate white pill is, I think he's still going to win. I'm going to explore what factors at the end still should make you optimistic that Trump's going to win. I just want to prepare the ground for if the unforeseen happens, what happens? Now, when everyone is going to think this and hear this, they're immediately going to think they're going to steal it again. Rigging. Okay, and I'm not dismissing that. I think, but we need a clear idea of what they're doing and how they're able to accomplish this, rather than just assuming that, oh, it's stolen. Dominion used its magic craft to do this, blah, blah, blah. Somebody like Emerald Robinson, who's on Twitter, is just continuing saying that we're going to lose. She has a terrible. First off, it's not likely her tweeting, but that's another that's another topic. Any case, she is saying like we're going to lose. It's done. We need to prepare, and then it's like, well, what is the preparation? And then it's like revolution. I don't think the boomer audience is gonna. The people over 50 are gonna revolt. Okay, not gonna happen. Even if you saw what happened at J6, we are not going to have another J6 or Stop the Steal if Democrats lose. It's going to be the direct-to-video version of Stop the Steal. So what you're going to happen is you're going to see a ton of prominent conservative commentators and Republican politicians fed post on Twitter, and then it's like, it's time to take our country back. And then you have like these kind of small protests. You're not going to have the large-scale protests of Stop the Steal. There was a unique factors of COVID, of anger over COVID that animated that. There was the response to the large protests that the left was staging over Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, and then people wanted to have the Stop the Steal was the backlash towards that and to COVID, as well as anger over the election results. But there was other things in play there. But there's not going to be large demonstrations. There weren't large demonstrations over Trump getting convicted or being indicted. You're not going to see Stop the Steal again. And most lawmakers, even though they're going to tweet and post a lot of wild stuff, they're not going to try to flip the election. And then in some places, they don't have the ability to. I mean, Democrats are complete control of Michigan, so they're not going to do that. I think they've lost a lot of the majorities in some places. They do have the supermajority in Wisconsin. Don't have a Democratic governor, or they do have a Democratic governor, so that limits them. But they still have that in Georgia. But they're going to win Georgia. I'm pretty confident they're going to win Georgia. So it's not even going to be a state. It's going to be these mixed states where it's either Republican governor, Democrat legislature, like Nevada. That's like pretty much the only example. Or Democrat governor, Republican legislature, which is like it in Wisconsin, where they actually have a supermajority, or they have a much smaller majority, like in Arizona and Pennsylvania. And that's where the battlefield would take place. And they're going to be very limited in that. And also, Trump no longer has the presidency. It makes it harder to try to wage these things. I mean, they can wage them in court. But you're not going to see the same type of push that you saw in 2020. So it would be direct-to-video Stop the Steal sequel, but direct-to-video version. And so that's what most people can conclude. It's like, and then that, because a lot of what right wing analysis is about is just providing, I always say this is providing entertainment and titillating the audience, not actually providing reasonable analysis or truthful analysis. It's just about hyping people up so they donate more and you get higher engagement. And actually proposing, like, well, here's what we need to do, versus it's all over, it's rigged, we need a revolution now. That's like going to get like 10 times more retweets. Okay, so people are going to prefer that message. And that's generally what people are going to be about. Not that I'm saying that like you shouldn't be upset about the results and saying that this is what it's about, but let's look at what actual factors are in play rather than just saying rigging. We need a revolution, because we're not going to have a revolution. All right. People, with the decline of hyper politicization, you don't even have the normies who are hyped up to do this stuff. I mean, it's just like you just have people in their 50s and 60s who are really hyped up, who are wanting to do something. So, the boomers, I mean, it's really more Gen Xers are not a revolutionary cast. All right. There's never been a revolution where it's just been where it's been middle-aged men with homes with a lot to lose, waging a revolution. It's just not, and that's generally the core audience. So you have to keep that factor in mind. So that's not saying that Democrats can not use dirty tricks and do shenanigans that corrupt the process, but there is something to solve. And really, it is just how much they're able to weaponize mail-in ballots and have very loose standards around that in order to win elections. I think the reason why they're going to win in Georgia, well, it's still a very red state, and they've also passed laws to restrict the mail-in balloting that help Democrats win in 2020 there. So they've done that. They've done some reforms in Wisconsin, and I think Wisconsin is a strong state for Trump to win, because once again, they have a Republican supermajority. In the midterms, Republicans actually won there. They won a statewide race with Senator Johnson, Ron Johnson, who was a top liberal target. He'd been involved in Stop the Steal. He's been pretty conservative. And, they really felt that they could win there. And he pulled out a victory statewide. Definitely better results there than in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Michigan statewide. And also they have the supermajority that indicates it's a Republican state. And these electoral reforms were voted on at the ballot box. And most elections, 2022 and beyond in Wisconsin, have been pretty good for Republicans. So I would say that those are the two states that Trump would win. I would almost say Georgia definitely, Wisconsin probably. So the Electoral College count will be much smaller. It's going to be an extremely competitive race, even if Trump somehow doesn't come out securing re-election. So that's the problem. The issue is that Pennsylvania and Michigan, I almost said it, Michigan have done absolutely nothing. Those loose mail-in ballot rules are still there. And Michigan has gone really blue lately. Now, everyone thinks that Michigan is a much more of a competitive state because the large Muslim population there doesn't want to vote for Biden. Now, if that's still a factor, I think Trump's chances increase. But the rest of the state is much bluer. Democrat governor, they got a horrible, Whitmer's terrible. And then they've got a strong Democratic majority in the legislature. It's a much bluer state now than it was in 2020. That hurts. And elections since then have not really helped Republicans. There's not been white pills for Republicans there. Pennsylvania also has these really loose mail-in ballot rules. Elections there have not gone well for Republicans since 2020. Midterms were supposed to be a big victory. Pennsylvania was arguably the biggest disappointment of that year. And besides Arizona, and that's it. And Arizona hasn't really reformed these laws that much either. And they lost very narrowly, far more narrowly than they did in Pennsylvania and Michigan in 2022. But There's issues there. There's also the massive polling gap. The polls I do reflect. We'll go actually into the polling question in a moment, but there is some of the polls you can see that there's something off because there's a massive gap between support between Trump and Kerry Lake. Kerry Lake sometimes is double digits behind Trump. Like Trump, most Arizona polls show him ahead of Biden. Meanwhile, Lake is struggling, and she's like, significantly behind in support of Trump. And you have to wonder, is like, who is the Trump Gallego voter? So there's either something wrong with the polling at one angle, either the presidential polling or the Senate polling in there, or one of them is, and one of them could be accurate and it's showing the support in the state for either the Senate for both candidates, or there's something else amiss there. Nevada is another strong state for Republicans that they could win. I'd have to look at the electoral college map, but even if they won Georgia, Wisconsin, and Nevada, and those are the only three gains, they would not win the election. Be an incredibly close election. They have to win. Even with Arizona, I remember at that time it would have tied or been 2 points off because there's also that electoral vote in Nebraska, the one that's like representing Omaha, which Nebraska is discussing getting rid of and just being winner take all like every other state except for Maine. They could do that, and that would, I don't know if that put them ahead by 2 electoral college votes or make it a tie. There's also some differences in how they allocate electoral college votes, but it'd be an extremely close election no matter what. If with Arizona, but Arizona has more electoral college votes than Nevada, so winning those 3 states is not going to be enough. So he's going to need, if he won Arizona, then he'd win 4 states. So that's what's at play here in the election. So those are those factors. So the one is those structural in place, the loose mail-in ballots that harm Republicans, and also Republicans are get destroyed in early voting. And early voting ensures that reliable Democrat voters vote. Meanwhile, Republicans abandoning early voting means that you have to hope that they're having good weather, they're not sick, they didn't have some errand or something that they had to run that limits how much time they have to vote. It's all dependent on voting day, on election day. And so some people may have been planning to vote, but something, as mishappens. Maybe there's a flood. Maybe there's they're really sick. They can't get out of bed. There's all these factors that, if they had early voted, that they would ensure their ballot is there. But if they're all dependent on election day, there are some factors that could limit that. And that sometimes happens with, I know that happened in 2022 where there was some bad weather, or there was even a more recent election. I think it was 2023 or some primary. Oh, no. It was the Iowa caucuses this year where it was really bad weather, and that may have impacted the vote. So those are something you have to keep in mind there. And loose mail-in balloting allows Democrats to ballot harvest. It's a gift for their ballot harvesting efforts. And they have all these constituents that they can ballot harvest. They go to low-income, minority, senior homes or wherever, and churches, and they're able to collect balloting. Republican voters being more individualistic and less tied to community, such communities as those, it makes it much harder to ballot harvest for Republicans. Also, there's organizational factors of the terrible Republican organizational structure that also goes into that, which we'll get to in a moment. Now I'm going to go to the other factor. So first factor, mail-in balloting is still going to be an issue, still there, and it's overwhelmingly positive for Democrats, or something that Democrats can be optimistic about. The second factor is Democrats now are more reliable voters than Republicans. And this has been a major shift. This is a huge shift in recent years. Because in the past, low turnout elections favored Republicans because Republicans were winning over reliable, older, white voters generally we were, Republicans, it wasn't that long ago, the Republicans had the advantage in college educated whites, that they were winning that category, and they were still winning the non-college educated white category, but their advantage there was less massive. But they were winning college educated white voters. And generally, the voters that they won were responsible citizens that made it, that were big into voting, and they would go and vote. Meanwhile, Democrats' base were blacks, all minorities, young people, all those types that, they're not going to vote in midterms. And so and only vote if it's like a massive get out the vote effort or they've got Obama on the ballot. But they've always struggled to make those people vote because those aren't the most reliable voters. And they also have more of the they also have more downscale white voters as well. Now it's flipped. Now the most reliable voters are generally liberal because most of the Republican bases change. It's much more of a downscale white element, also downscale Hispanic element, and these elements are not as reliable to go and vote. These are the type of people that are like, oh shit, I forgot to, make out my schedule to go vote. And also my vote's not going to count anyway. They're going to steal the election again. So I'm not going to vote. There's a lot of people like that. We also have terrible messaging on Republicans because, the one thing is that there's a lot of potential Trump voters. And when you look at ballots or polling, among just all voters, Trump does better. But among likely voters, among the voters that are definitely going to go, the advantage is much narrower, and usually favors Biden in these polls. It shows that sometimes shows Biden with a lead when it's among likely voters, which is a problem because a lot of these guys are saying, "Oh, I'm going to vote for Trump." They're like, "Are you going to vote?" No, why not? They're going to steal my vote anyway. The thing about the election rigging is the messaging and propaganda about it is often self-defeating because you generally want propaganda to motivate people to go and vote. This propaganda is motivating people to go and sit and brood at home, not actually voting because, if you tell like all these people like, oh, your vote's not going to matter, they're going to steal the election anyway, and our only hope is, a magical revolution that's not going to happen, then these people are just not going to vote. They're like, well, I'll wait for the revolution that I'm not going to participate in. And so it is self-defeating rhetoric when you don't offer a solution and are really narrowed in on what the problem is. And it's changing mail-in ballot rules. It's like doing that. If you just say it's like we need to change these mail-in ballot rules so we can have fairer elections and the elections that our founders intended, then you can get these people to go out and vote and try to change things. But as of right now, we prefer the more wild conspiracy theories in order to boost the engagement of conservative personalities on social media, which is what most of the right-wing media market is about. It's just about, grabbing as much attention as possible and providing as much stupid slop for their audiences as you can imagine. And then they wonder why they lose elections. And it's like, well, you guys think like space aliens are fucking stealing their election. Like how the hell do you expect your audience to go out and vote? All right. And not space aliens, it's space alien Nephilim. Anyway, that's another factor is that a lot of our messaging on this, most people have tamped down on that. It's why like Emma Robinson, a few other people have not gotten the memo, and they're clearly doing this to boost their own engagement. It's not about being truthful. But most people have realized that messaging isn't, very productive, but that it is burrowed deep within a lot of the Republican base and they're not there. But even outside of that, these are just not as reliable voters. These are not people who are going to plan their schedule well in advance to make sure that they vote, whether it's through early voting. And all these people are suspicious of early voting, so they're not early voting, and it's all election day. Meanwhile, due to Democrats now winning college-educated white voters at a much higher rate, they now have the most reliable voter demographic there is, and that low turnout elections now favor Democrats. High turnout, this is different from any elections in the past, now favor Republicans because more of those people who like Trump for being anti-establishment and, being who he is, they're more likely to turn out to vote in those type of elections where they're hyped up. Now, this election that we're going to have this year, due to the fact that we're in a less hyper politicized state, where a lot of the American public, if you watch like TV, if you see the news, if you walk around, you definitely see there's less interest in this election. I don't see in my area, I live in a liberal area, I do not see any Biden signs. I rarely see any Biden signs, which, years past, I would see Biden signs everywhere, or Biden and Hillary Democrat signs everywhere. I have not, and even by this time in the summer, I have not seen that shit here, which I could say is a bad sign for Biden, but it's also a sign that these people aren't politicized. Now, I've usually said that this is a good thing because it means a lot of people in the past who would have like, well, I can't vote for a fascist, I'm going to lose my job. Now they're like, okay, well, maybe I might vote for him. So that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing is that people in a low turnout, there's a more reliable core Democrat voters that could go out and vote. And then, the polls are showing, and the polls based on a much higher turnout than was actually happens on election day or election itself, shows Trump winning, but then there's a lower turnout and actually the numbers favor Biden. That's part what happened in the midterms, even though midterms had a pretty high turnout. In some states it was different. And the polling isn't really reflecting that change in Democrats now earning those core reliable voters much more than Republicans. I mean, the polls leading up to the midterms showed massive Republican win. I remember my podcast right before the election, I was like, Republicans are going to win because I just looked at the polling. And even state by state, it showed them like winning. And generally the assumption was if, there's a 1 point in favor of the Democrat in these polling, then it's the favorable Republican election because the past polls of 2016 where it's like polls don't matter, which has been a terrible take because now Republicans have used that for everything. And Democrats are even using that too in this election. And DeSantis people are like, oh, you believe in polls? DeSantis is going to crush Trump. Based on what? My assumption. And of course that didn't happen. And then the polls showed pretty accurately what the primary was going to be like. And the polls in 2016 weren't that off. It was just that, and Trump, I think the polling average was like 3-4 points, Hillary Clinton advantage, and Trump, still lost that, I think it was under 3% in the popular vote, but he won the electoral college. So, there's something there where it's nationwide that it doesn't truly reflect what could be the election results. But now the polling is, instead of favoring Republicans, it now favors Democrats, and that if you have a Republican 1 point ahead, and depending on how turnout looks, that means a Democrat is going to win. So that is that Democrats now have a more reliable voter base than Republicans. Republicans now have low information voters who are like, a lot of these guys may go to rallies and stuff, but then like, they're going to steal my vote anyway. I'm not going to go. So there are issues there that with a change in the base that now we don't have this advantage that Republicans used to have. So that's it. Now there's the structural problem is the Democrats party is a well-oiled machine that is beating out Republicans when it comes to fundraising. Now, Trump raised a ton of money after his conviction, but that is all for that's all for the presidential campaign. And still Biden is beating him on fundraising. And it gets worse when it comes to congressional races and Senate races, is the Republicans are absolutely destroying Republicans when it comes to congressional races and Senate races. Now, money does not buy you victories. Is that David Trone in Maryland ran in a Democrat primary. He spent gargantuan sums. I think over $60 million. It might have even been more. And he still lost the primary. So there is an example that you could still lose a race. But those are primaries. Primaries isn't maybe the best angle. But money can still buy you a serious spot in politics. And if Republicans don't have enough money for ads, and that for 3 months leading up to the election, all ads are Biden and Democrats, that helps offset the disadvantages the Democrats are going into this election. You can go back. They generally cite money can't buy you election with Mike Bloomberg's 2020 run. That should not be the takeaway from Mike Bloomberg's run. Mike Bloomberg got in like right a week before, like all very close to the Iowa caucus, and he immediately became the third. He immediately became a serious challenger just due to money because he blanketed the airwaves and YouTube with ads. And that made him a serious contender. And the only reason that he didn't do as well is that he entered the race at the very end. If he had entered in even like 2 months earlier, he might have won. There were some strong institutional factors at play against him, as Democratic endorsements and who the old guard is backing really does matter, because if it's a powerful black lawmaker who backs somebody, blacks go with that vote. I mean, the fact that Biden won James Clyburn's endorsement in South Carolina, which won him in South Carolina, and that eventually got the ball rolling to get most of these Congressional Black Caucus members to rally behind Biden and all their black leaders, and then he secured the black vote, and then all the other establishment candidates or center-left candidates then immediately dropped out and backed Biden, and he was able to defeat the Bernie and Bloomberg menace in the race. But if that hadn't happened, or if Bloomberg became the guy that blacks wanted to vote for because he gave them a lot of money, he could have easily won. But it was mainly that at the time he jumped in and the unique circumstances of the fact that the entire establishment after South Carolina in 2020 rallied completely around Biden, and no one else had a shot after that. But it still made him a serious contender when it should have not made him a serious contender at all. I mean, if you looked at that primary, like the last person who would have been competitive, you would have on paper would have been Bloomberg. But the fact that Bloomberg spent a fuck ton of money and was just having ads everywhere, that made him a competitor. And so this could be the case in this election if Republicans are struggling with funding and Democrats are just running these targeted ads and keep getting their name out and having that message. Then there's that. I'll get to the message in a moment, because I think this is the weakest factor, but I'm going to get to this. The other structural factor is that how Democrats operate on the ground, their ground game. They have a much better volunteer network. They're far superior at get out the vote. I mean, this is why they're all into mail-in ballots, because they know they can ballot harvest and they ensure their voters are voting. Republican get out the vote efforts are a complete joke. They failed in 2020. That's a factor that, even with all the shenanigans, Republicans just completely dropped the ball on that. They've dropped the ball in 2022 on that. Their electoral, ensuring voters get out to vote is just a joke. They just have to hope, independently of the Republican Party structure, that they do this. And they're not going to have the type of money for ads that Democrats do. They're not even doing a very good job of targeting. One thing I do worry about is that Republicans are finally spotting they're finally spotting that they can win like 15% of the black vote. And they're like, oh my God, we can win 15% of the black vote. And then they're going to spend a ton of fucking money on winning the black vote, when it's like, no, don't do that. First off, it's not going to matter if you get 15%, but they love this. This is their Moby Dick. They're just like, oh my God, we've got to pursue this. And they're going to ignore trying to get college-educated white voters, and they're still going to spend a lot of time on increasing 15% of the black vote. And also the Latino vote, which, they're going to get more of the Hispanic vote, but, it's only like 10% of the voting population is Hispanic. You get 40%, that could help you in Texas and Florida. But, Texas and Florida are going to go Republican no matter what. It could help you in Arizona. But the real issue is trying to get college-educated white voters and really ensuring that the downscale white voters vote. Not so much trying to win over Detroit, which is what Trump did this week. Trump did this black outrage voter event, and Detroit, and he went into the hood, and they're like, he went into the hood. This is what Joe Biden don't go into the hood. And I'm like, oh, please, whatever. And he went there, and it's so funny because there's all this messaging that like, this is how we win over blacks, is we talk about the dangers of illegal immigrants. And everyone thinks that this is a winning message among Democrats. And then he gives this message, and he got very tepid applause. This reminds me of when Vivek last year went into Chicago ghetto to talk about illegal immigrants being bad. And the blacks said, we don't care about that. We just want reparations. And we just want our money. Because their whole problem with illegal immigrants is not that they're here, is that they feel that they're taking their the money from the government that's supposed to be for them, their housing, rather than they're here in general. And anytime you're like, the illegal immigrants are taking your jobs, it's like, we might not work. Or our jobs are with the government, so they're not threatened by illegal immigrants. It's mainly the doling out of government money that they care about, and they want more government money or ensure that money goes to them. They don't really care that much about the illegal immigrant presence here, as long as they're not taking away their public housing. So even their messaging doesn't work with them. But we went there, and it's like, They can't help themselves. Republicans are obsessed with this idea. This is their great hunt, their great pursuit. And they're going to spend as much time as possible on this. And so while Democrats are trying to motivate convince college-educated whites to vote for Biden by using targeted messaging, they're going to say, he's a threat to democracy. He's a convicted felon. Abortion. And it's not so far not working, but they know that it's going to work on, respectable suburban voters who are much likely to vote. And so they're like this. Meanwhile, Trump is running ads in the ghetto about how he is a convicted felon and he's just like blacks. And then, that doesn't get them any votes. But Republicans are like, we're creating the multiracial working class. Not a strong plan to do so. So that could be a difference of focus. Democrats are going to be hyper-focused on getting those college-educated voters, not just whites, but Asians as well, and any other category, to get out and vote, and that they're going to stick with Biden. And the whole messaging of this election is going to be about them. They're also going to try to mobilize black voters, which I've talked to people about this, and this conversation that I'm having today is inspired by a friend who, he's an academic. He really knows this stuff. And he is telling me about this. Now, he's saying that they're going to get mass black mobilization out. And unless there's some new ballot harvesting mechanism they have, they're worried about it. But they're going to spend a lot of money on this. And they could just say, appointed a black woman to the Supreme Court. Maybe he'll pursue reparations in the second term. Trump, is... they could do the anti-DEI stuff. He's going to want to ban teaching of slavery in schools or something. They could do something like that, and maybe that might be enough to get black voters out. But Democrats, I just think in this election, have a better idea of who they need to get out to vote, and that's college-educated whites and Asians and blacks. Meanwhile, Republicans have blacks and Hispanics as like their prime goals, and when they need to be focusing on trying to win back the college-educated white voters, and they're just not going to do so. And they're going to have limited resources and much more idiotic volunteers for that. Now, the messaging of the election, I am more skeptical of this, but, this was enough for them to win the midterms. Because they didn't have convicted felon at that time, but they did have threats to democracy and abortion. And that was enough for them to do well in the midterms. Now, a little bit different time period from 2022. 2022, we were still in that hyper-politicized state. It was starting to decline with COVID the lockdowns being lifted and people moving on to other things. But we're still very hyper-politicized at that time. And now we're less hyper-politicized. So maybe this stuff doesn't really work on their voters. But there could be some new abortion decision from the courts or something where they're able to motivate voters for that. And threats to democracy, I don't know. If you watch cable news, they talk about Project 2025, the efforts to staff the next Trump administration all the damn time. So that's a message that's been reaching their core audience, that democracy may be over. And I remember seeing this stuff in 2022. It's like, this is outlandish. Like, democracy might end in November. Like, how the hell does anyone believe this? unfortunately, a lot of people believed it, and they were able to win in that election. So it could work again. And now they have convicted felon, which it's not so much working now, but there could be that effort, if they put out enough ads and then repeat it, and these respectable suburban voters who are just like, well, I don't like the economy, I don't like open borders, but I can't vote for a convicted felon, and he's going to take away my democracy. And they'll go and do that. And also there is a lot of anger over the Stop the Steal efforts and stuff. I think it's dissipated, but there are people who felt that like those efforts were taking away their vote. At the same time, Republican voters, core voters, thought it was taking away their vote, but there was probably a larger segment of voters, independents and Democrats, who felt that it was also taking that those efforts to deal with fraud and other things stole their votes. So there was that factor in play that helped Democrats. But they'll run on it. I'm a little bit skeptical, but they're because things are so bad. Like inflation's increasing, immigration's bad, the world picture is a mess. Biden is also just having so many senile old man moments that it's really bad. They cannot put him in public that much. Like last week at G7 where Maloney had to he wandered off and Maloney had to come and grab him and move him back, and he just looked like a frail, senile old man. Then there was the fundraiser they did with Obama, and Obama had to grab him to walk him off stage. All these events are going to continue to pile on, and this does matter to voters, that they think that there's nothing there. And every public appearance is a new embarrassment for Biden. And it far more so than 2020. In 2020 his mind wasn't really there, but physically he was pretty in good shape for his age. For a man in his late 70s, he's pretty good. He could run up on stage and stuff, and they really like to highlight his physical vigor, which he did still have. He no longer has that. And so now the body reflects the mind as well. And he has a weird walk, and he just looks feeble and completely out of it. He just doesn't know what's happening. And there were reports on G7 that it's like he's just can't follow conversations anymore. So those things are going to start to mount, and he is going to have that problem. I don't know how they're going to fix this. He could exceed expectations at the debate. That could put to damper that you think he's senile? Well, he did pretty well at the debate. I mean, it's the same with the State of the Union. State of the Union, people thought he was going to keel over. I thought that too. And he managed to exceed expectations, but expectations are so low that that it's easy to exceed them. But if he exceeds them, then it helps him. And that's the type of stuff that people pay attention to. So that's a factor. But there's other issues at play. First off, immigration is really helping Republicans, but that could be moved out of the front of voters' minds and based on other things, like maybe they get the border's not reported on that much from now till November. They are reporting on it a little bit more, but they're like, Biden is taking a strong stance against this. And Biden could just say, oh, look, we've now controlled the border numbers. And maybe that might convince some gullible people that the issue's been solved. And so maybe that can move away from being a top voter issue. I mean, right now it's one of top 3 voter issues. And sometimes in some polls it's the number 1. Among Republicans, it's the number 1 issue. But that could change. Economy could improve from now until November. And maybe that'll make people, it's like, well, we'll just stick with Biden. He could get a peace deal in Israel. And maybe that could get, I don't think so, but maybe that could get some of these Muslim voters to turn out for him. And maybe he convinces them that, hey, Trump is going to be way more pro-Israel than me, and the only way you're going to get a peace deal is through me, and maybe that they will change their minds and go out and turn out to vote for him, which would ensure Michigan and a few other places go for Biden. So those are some factors that could change between now and November. And there's also the matter of what happens if Trump is sentenced to prison, which I've talked about this before. I don't know how they can put him in prison because he's going to have Secret Service protection. Maybe they put him on house arrest. But they put him on house arrest, he can't go out campaigning. Maybe they put him on house arrest for 6 months, for the entire campaign. and he has to do video conference campaigns, and maybe that deflates some of the enthusiasm for him. That could change the election. So there are factors there that could make senile Biden, despite needing to be walked around and guided by other world leaders, get another term. And God help us if he gets another term. I'm just thinking that's another podcast. I don't want to blackpill people too much. All I have to say is that it's going to get very stupid on the American right if that happens. But I still believe Trump is going to win. So we're going to conclude on a white pill. And this is what I want to say. The reason why Trump's going to win is I want to look at the meta factor. There's always a meta factor in these races that aren't fully captured by the polling and these, on the ground factors that we've talked about this podcast. There's always that meta factor. And in 2016, people were upset. People wanted to voice their discontent. They felt and they wanted change. And Hillary Clinton represented the ultimate status quo. And in that race, Hillary Clinton decided just to stop campaigning for 2 months, to chill out, and she wasn't in very good health when she was campaigning. And she just decided that they had this in the bag. They don't need to campaign. It's like, how the hell can we lose to Donald Trump? And they lost to Donald Trump. Biden's not going to do that this time. They're not going to do that this time. But in that meta factor, if you looked at what was happening, it looked to favor Trump. And if you looked at past elections, like in 2008, the meta factor of the economy, there's all this anger over the Iraq War and the recession and the Great Recession beginning. And obviously they were not going to vote for a Republican. It was going to go for a Democrat. If you look at, the meta factors of, 1992 races, that the economy began slumping, and then, all that popularity around George H.W. Bush after Iraq had totally disappeared. And, there was all this support for Ross Perot. There was a lot of anger, populist upsurge, and that helped Democrats. So there's always kind of a meta factor there where you take a sky level view of things and you look down and you say things don't favor Biden. Biden has hardly any accomplishments. Biden is incredibly bad in public. Biden has open borders. People feel things are worse now than 5 years ago, 4 years ago. But now, if you ask them 4 years ago if things improved, that message actually helped because it's like COVID, which isn't really Trump's fault. But people being like, well, and Biden had nothing to do with making this country better in over 4 years. But if the message became 5 years ago between now, then, the message helps Trump. There's so many just crazy things going on in the world. He's allowing the world to go to hell. Open borders, economy sluggish, people are paying more in food prices. There is just a lot of factors weighing against Biden. And I think while there are some advantages, maybe with a less hyper-politicized moment, is that core Democratic voters are going to vote no matter what. There is no real enthusiasm for Biden. There was a lot more enthusiasm for Biden because all these Democrats and liberals wanted to get rid of Trump. And they finally got rid of Trump. And now they've been like, well, maybe Trump wasn't that bad. It wasn't really fascism. And a lot of this hysterical messaging that they're putting out there about Trump, they're like, well, I don't really think that was true. It was pretty nice in 2019, 2018. And there's less of that fear factor around Trump. And that helps Trump. And there's just no enthusiasm for Biden. And there's a lot more enthusiasm for Trump, as you can see by the rallying around him after his conviction. That we can get to see another case of this when he's, at sentencing there, and he's much better on the trail. His mind's far sharper than Biden. He's able to move around much better than Biden. I think that you look at the meta factors and it overwhelmingly favors Trump in this race. And I think things are probably going to get worse on the issues. I said that maybe some of the things on the issues might get better, but I think the issues are going to get worse because it's going to be far harder to hide Biden's physical ailments and mental ailments as the campaign continues. So I'm still optimistic Trump's going to win, and I'm declaring Trump's going to win, but I think there is a chance that we could have another 2022 here, and I outlined the factors of why that could happen. Is that one, mail-in balloting and loose mail-in ballot rules are still in place in a lot of key states. Two, Democrats, unlike in the past, now have a much more reliable voter base than Republicans. Three, Democrats have a much better structure and fundraising than Republicans, and those three factors, and with the messaging, probably I will say the messaging around abortion, that it could motivate young people to, forget about the problems with Biden over Israel and other things and turn out to vote. That these things could give Biden another term. I still think Trump's going to win, as I keep saying, but we need to keep these in mind. It's not going to be so we're not totally blindsided by what happens, and then we need a game plan to figure out how to change things in order to help our side win in the future. And number one thing, eliminate, come down hard on mail-in balloting. Two, work to win back the college-educated white vote. And three, develop a much better structure among Republicans and the party, and that we have a better get out the vote effort and other things. So those are the three solutions that we're going to have. So that's it for the main topic. Now we're going to go straight into the Cod of League questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cod of League option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.com, and make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. So we got a lot of great questions today, and I spent a lot of time on our main topic, which wasn't a question, so I've had to push a lot to the mailbag, so I have more time to talk about them. I know there's some guys who want it on the main episode. If you really want it on the main episode, if you mark it main episode, I am legally bound to read it, so I'm just saying it. But generally, I save the shorter questions or very much news topics or something I wanted to cover to this. So we'll begin with K-Max. K-Max has got two short questions, or two questions, very succinct answers for. He said, a TikTok woman named Lily Gaddis became viral over a video in which she said the N-word. The phrase was broke ass N-word. And it was with an A, not a hard R. What amazed me, Scott, is how the rap and hip-hop black culture is so ingrained that even conservative or distant right people seem to speak in Ebonics, which is we now use the term AAVE, African American Vernacular English, for some reason. Ebonics is now dated for, I don't know why. Also, that an attractive woman doing this makes her viral in conservative media so quickly. Scott, what's your view on the irony of Ebonic speak and the power of this word still having such a hold on the culture? Should this even be a story, and is part of why Kanye West got so huge to America First? Is the power of hip-hop or the modern Gen Z culture? Any extractive woman or base black guy with these ideas vaults to the top of conservative distant right media? Well, Kanye, or Ye, as he's now referred to, is one of the biggest celebrities in the world, and him starting to sound conservative or express right-wing ideas was going to be a huge factor, even regardless of him being being in hip-hop. He's just a major cultural figure, and he's been one for over 20 years. And so that's why. So I'm going to focus more on the Lily question and the hold on the culture, is that, yes, this is just how people speak. And I've always noticed that this was a similar thing with the Morgan Wallen thing, because he used he used pussy, ass, and word A, not with the R at the end, to his friends, and he was just being a drunk, and he's just like laughing with his friends. And both these terms are reflecting rap influence. They're not actually reflecting racism. It's just the fact that whites can't say this stuff, which is just kind of the absurd social dynamic here, where everyone is listening to rap and we're hearing these terms all the time, but then whites are not allowed to say these words at all, or even hear them. It's like, it's this, huge hit, and it's using the N-word all the time, and then you're supposed to cover your ears. I was around some friends, and they were playing some old Nelly song, and I think it was Country Grammar, and there's like a whole verse where it's like N-word and N-word this is like various N-words, and I'm like, I don't think us as white people to listen to this. I mean, as terms of course, you gotta. I might be violating my own code, but I wasn't the one putting it on, and somebody, so you're just like that but it's so prevalent in our society that this is just how it is. So this is no longer a reflection of racism, even though they're saying racism. It just is, you're stating that this is a privileged term that only blacks can say, and that you're not supposed to say that. And if you do say that, then you're being racist. But it's not actually a reflection of racism. It's a reflection of how much they are influenced by black culture. And I think for younger people, these Ebonic-isms, AAV-isms doesn't sound as right, have really gotten into the culture, and now this is how people speak. It's that somebody made the tweet the other day where it's saying that it would have been surfer slang, which would have been white, like radical, gnarly bro, and that would have been stuff for Gen X youth. But now it's entirely based around black culture and black slang, much more so than it would have been in years past. So I would say this is a negative development. This is why I always recommend not listening to rap, but it is what it is. She got big for a video before that, which I have a column on tomorrow. It's not really talking that much. It's just using that as the news hook. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, I always say it's not a sign of racism at all. It's really just a sign of black cultural influence, which it's funny that they always want to say it's racist. It was similar with the Morgan Wallen situation from a few years back. Now we've got a question from Appalachian, and he asks, what is my view on how AFPAC went? Well, I mean, it went a little chaotic because it got canceled. But they still had the event anyway, and I don't know if this was going to be the full lineup for the main event because, I'm out of the loop. But if you look at the main lineup for the event, it was Nick Fuentes. I mean, hopefully you know who Nick is. Then Vince James, and then James Kirkpatrick, Kevin Deanna, and Jared Taylor as their speakers. And if you look at that lineup, that's a pretty solid lineup. I don't think anyone would strongly disagree with that lineup. And, it convey a message that you would largely want, an identitarian message you largely want. Some of the things you would probably disagree with, or some of the things I may not fully agree with some of the speakers. But, I think it's like a serious platform. All four of them are white. It's not... some of the aspects, some of the more eccentric personalities aren't the ones put forward. And these are like serious people who give speeches. So I think it would be fine with that. But due to the chaotic and it got canceled and they're all moving around, some of the other personalities that maybe they weren't wanting to highlight as their speakers then came out to the forefront. So there was some confusing aspects because I'm not really fully formed on some of these people, but I know there was like some black kid who went out there, was leading the chants, and he then said that like Nick is definitely not racist, and it's like, okay, whatever. And then there's like that next speech where he's like, I freaking love Hitler. I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of messaging here. I'm not sure what's being spread. So I think a lot of people who are on social media were a little confused by some of this because you can't really control rallies and who's there and some of the stuff. It's not it's not a highly structured event like the conference. And if you look at what the conference was planning, even though the conference itself had its own chaos because it looked like it was in a nightclub, and I know there was some security guard that was attacking him and didn't like some of the speeches, and they were chanting whites, 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 and that offended the place where they're having it or something. I'm not fully formed on this stuff, so I know that there was just there's a lot of chaos in there, but it happens. They still got the speeches there, but due to the fact that it didn't get to take place in the main event because this private venue canceled them, which was outrageous. They shouldn't do that with private speech, but this is always an issue that these groups have had in the past. I think that they were able to succeed in years past over this. I remember when I went and spoke at AFPAC the first time, which was much smaller. It was like over 100 people, because it was trying to be very low key. And I remember we had to reserve the space under a different organization name, and we were trying to hide from Antifa because Antifa was still a problem at that time, which is less of a problem now. That you always had to worry about them finding out and them blowing up the hotel's phone lines to get that canceled. So it's different. And then the next times that they had it, they were able to have it without a hitch. This time, I think by wanting to get a bigger venue, that there's and maybe the name was more familiar to some of the people who were hosting it, that they were able to spot it and like, oh, we don't want this. But it just shows that if you're going to have like a large event that you're bringing a lot of people in, you really do have to use a public venue. The worries that we had in the years past, if you're doing a public venue, first off, one is that you not have the money to do this. Judging by how many people he's able to attract, he's saying that he got 2,000 or over 1,000. I mean, even getting over 500, you can easily reserve a spot and cover the whole bill and profit by getting a public space at like the Reagan Building, or there's a lot of places in DC. You really have to go to a public space, which is why American Renaissance has been going to the State Park in Tennessee for years. And it's also why VDARE bought a castle, so they can have events and not worrying about it getting canceled. Because VDARE had this problem too, is that they kept trying to host conferences, and they did it under VDARE, and then they, like, week before, they're like, oh, we can't have a racist there. And then they cancel, but then the hotels would then have to pay them out for canceling on them and violating the contract. But with public venues, if it's publicly owned, they can't ban you. And Ameren has successfully sued Tennessee for them trying to impose security costs on them, and they are required to respect free speech no matter the speech that's being delivered, and that's just what you have to do. I don't think you really have to worry about Antifa being having a major protest outside. They've really dissipated in energy and activist and the type of stuff that they were doing in the Trump years. So you could just easily have it at some place like the Reagan Building, and there's definitely a space big enough to host 1,000 or more people. So that's just what they would have to do going forward with this. Just one of the things. But I think all the other kind of odd sightings. I know David Duke showed up, which I think David Duke just showed up on his own. I don't think he was considered one of the VIPs. So once again, it's like, you don't have a full control over who decides to show up at your event. So people can then spend it however they want. But as I said, when you look at the speaker lineup that they had, I think most of our listeners would be fine with that. And most of the chaos was being just canceled. And the fact is, if they had the whole event go without as planned, and the focus was on what the message is conveyed by the speakers, then that's what people would be talking about. It would be the message conveyed by the conference and what these speakers were saying, and that would be the focus. But instead, it's on the other things that were happening rather than that. And so that's just one of the things that happens with getting canceled. But the fact that they were still able to have some sort of a conference of some sort or event of some sorts there, it says something. This became a problem more with the alt-right. One of the funniest moments in the alt-right is that MPI, which is Richard Spencer's group, and they went from 2016 having it in a public building, I think it was the Reagan Building in DC, and having a ton of people and tons of news media attention, and then the next year they literally have it in a barn out in Maryland, and they hid their factor, and then eventually staff realized what it was, and they canceled it midway through, and they didn't have like an alternative plan. We're gonna have this conference out in the field or something. They completely canceled it and moved them out, and that was not a good move. So now you're at least able to stay within the city and not have it at a barn, and you're able to do that. But you just gotta, you just have to use it at a public building. Just really ensure that the conference goes forward in the way you plan. So that'd be my thoughts on that. So now moving along to other questions. We've got One from Kingslander. He indicated this is for the main podcast, so I'm legally required to read it. He says, Scott, over the last few weeks, several people have been arrested for defacing gay pride flag murals with tire tracks and hit with felony charges, even though realistically these crimes amount to little more than petty vandalism. Meanwhile, crazy libtard activists deface national monuments and block traffic for inane causes and either get a slap on the wrist or their charges are dropped. What can the right do to fight back against the absurd level of preferential treatment the left gets for their vandalism compared to the minor vandalism caused by teens who probably aren't even actively right-wing, which is considered the Pride Month cringe? They just have to get solid legal representation. This should be a free speech issue. This should be, though, if the ACLU was actually doing what they did 20 or 30 years ago, which the ACLU we now view as very bad, but they would always take these free speech cases that actually helped right-wingers. I mean, they would represent even full-on neo-Nazis, and that helped support free speech. But now it's up to conservative legal groups. And so really what these kids deserve is to have somebody pay a lot of money to get solid defense attorneys and make a free speech claim that's saying that, you are not, this is not a hate crime. This is, this, by saying it's a hate crime, you are establishing hate speech laws that is against it. There's no person hurt in this. You can say it's, you can charge them with some type of vandalism, like something equivalent to graffiti. They pay a fucking fine. That's it. That's whatever. But you can even charge that they weren't intentionally doing that. But that's really all it should be, is that it's like the equivalent to a ticket or a very minor misdemeanor, not a felony hate crime. And so you really just have to fund the legal defense for these kids and others. I'm a little confused that that's not going to happen. And similar to what could happen with elections is that people have this hysteric tweets about this and like what we need to do. And then no one actually provides the level-headed support and actions that can help these people accused of these crimes, and then they just prefer to go into hyperbole on Twitter, and that's what it leads to. But really, to fight back is that you just need to get solid legal help for these guys and establish a free speech precedent that no, this is, running over this stuff with scooters is not a hate crime. And that needs to be established as a precedent. And the only way you can do that is by providing solid legal defense for these kids and these people accused of these crimes. And maybe conservatives will pull through. That is a strong action item that they need to do, but we'll see. So that's my advice on that matter. Going along, we've got, I think, one more question. Let's see. We've got two more questions. Okay. This one comes from Liberal Farts College Apparatchik. He says, with the onset of summer, the beautiful weather has brought, like a plague of locusts, the return of the landscapers from 8 a.m. to midday, 7 days a week for the next 4 months. The landscapers are bringing their cacophonous machines of yard maintenance to every suburb from Bangor, Maine to San Diego. What is to be done? How is the white man to think with all this noise? And will this be tolerated in the Trump and rank? I have never been that bothered by lawn maintenance, landscaping. I mean, it is what it is. You've got to maintain your lawn. I prefer the noise over the unmaintained lawns. When I see unmaintained lawns, I see the Anglo-Saxon a retreat. The Anglo-Saxon takes care of their lawns. The Nordic man takes care of his lawn. It's the Hispanic that doesn't take care. Well, even though they're all landscapers, it seems like they're the ones who don't take care of their landscape. So you got to mow your lawn. The only time I get annoyed by this is when I'm doing walks. I like to go on an hour-long walk every morning. And there'll be the landscapers out and they're like blowing their shit and all this. And I'm like, where the hell am I supposed to walk? They take up the sidewalk. That would be my only problem. But I know a lot of people hate the yard maintenance. And I think if I lived in a more normal suburban home, maybe I would have problems with this. I know that Chris Caldwell had an article years ago about the tyranny of the leaf blowers and this stuff. And it's like he's trying to write in his suburban home, and it's like this damn noise is there. The noise I have is more construction stuff here, which I've always been wondering what the hell is going on there. But outside of that, I don't like the noise getting in and stuff, but it's not so much the landscapers causing this. But if I lived in a different area, maybe I would be more anti-landscapers. But they're necessary. I always say you got to maintain your lawn. If you don't want the appearance of not caring about your lawn. And so they're a necessary evil, in my opinion. But they should be more mindful of the sidewalk. Also, the other thing is like when they have the ride lawnmower and they're riding on the sidewalk. It's like, come on, man. I really don't like people taking up the sidewalk. It's like, where am I supposed to walk? So that's my own little problem. Now we're going to end on New England refugee. He says, I love Shakespeare and believe he is vital to Anglo-American culture. What is your opinion of him? Thanks. I'm not the biggest Shakespeare fan. Not that I don't like him. It's just that I don't. The way it's written of like reading plays, it's something you want to watch rather than read like a novel. So I've never been that into Shakespeare, but I appreciate Shakespeare. And so I think we definitely need to put more Shakespeare in schools because if you look at most of our history of the references that Americans would rely on, they would go to first the Bible, then the classics like classical literature like Homer and Romans, Greeks, and then they'd go to Shakespeare. So those were like the triumvirate of Anglo-American culture, of what their references would be. Now all three have been put to the side and we reference Marvel, Star Wars, and Harry Potter, and rap. So it'd be much better if we had Shakespeare. So I would think for any education plan, if you're teaching English, instead of reading To Kill a Mockingbird, or they probably have even worse stuff than To Kill a Mockingbird, we instead would read Hamlet and Julius Caesar and all the great works from Shakespeare. And I think Shakespeare is still right-wing because he was establishing a British nationalism, or very specifically English nationalism, where it's celebrating all the heroes and their values and traditions with his works. And so I think it is worthwhile of appreciation. And there's so many cultural references you'll only get by being fully immersed in Shakespeare and knowing Shakespeare. So I definitely appreciate Shakespeare, but I'm not the biggest fan. I prefer if Wagner or opera to Shakespeare, but I have no real problem with Shakespeare, and we definitely need to teach him more in schools and bring back Shakespeare into schools. So I think that's important. It's a core part of Anglo-American culture, and the stuff that it promotes is very good. Battle scenes and heroism and dying for your country, dying for your people, standing up for noble causes such as that. That's all a good message that young people need to hear. Now, I said that was the final question, but I lied. We've got a special. It's like an encore. It's like the band, you think they're done. And then they come out again for another hit. This is what we're having. Because there is a topic I missed talking about, and I told this person I would mention their question, but then they hadn't resubmitted it because... Anyway, this is difficult. This is from Dave. And Dave was asking my thoughts on whether the Hunter Biden conviction will help Trump or help Biden in the upcoming election. And this would have been something good to talk about in the first topic, but we'll cover it right now at the end. So the question Dave wants to know is, does this help Biden? Is this going to make, his re-election chances better? I think it's going to be a non-factor, which makes it a good thing for Biden, because Biden was worried that it could be a big factor in this election. Really, voters don't give a shit about Hunter Biden. And you could say, well, why are they going to care about Trump? Well, Trump is the actual candidate. Hunter Biden is not the candidate. Joe Biden is the candidate. And the fact that he's not going to pardon him and he's going to let the rule of law take place, he can go out there and tout as like, hey, my son got convicted. Obviously, he got preferential treatment. They allowed other charges, more serious charges or they allowed the statute of limitations to run out on this more serious charges. And they initially wanted to give him an incredible plea deal that was outrageous for what he's accused of, but eventually they convicted him. And Biden could say, look, my own son, nobody's above the law, even my own son, and I respect the rule of law in the courts. And he say, Trump doesn't. They all attack the rule of law in the courts. I don't think it's going to be a major factor, but it ultimately helps more Democrats solidify that message around Trump as like a threat to rule of law and democracy, and he's a convicted felon, by having that Hunter Biden is also convicted, and Joe Biden, unlike the Republican Party, respects what the court said. Also, it's a problem because Republicans are once again going to focus a lot on Hunter Biden, and voters don't give a shit about this. And this is once again part of the bad messaging that could happen, is that Democrats hyper-focus on what they think might motivate college-educated voters to vote Biden and to turn out. Meanwhile, Republicans are focused on black outreach, Hunter Biden's penis, and all this other crazy nonsense that no one cares about. And they once again make that the election issue, like they sort of did in 2020. So that could end up benefiting Biden. I think it helps Biden is that it makes it a non-factor in the election, while Republicans are going to desperately and in vain try to make it a factor. And it helps Biden's messaging slightly on that he's standing up for the rule of law. Obviously, he's not by what's happening at the border. And he respects it and our democracy, yada, 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 while convicted felon Trump wants to overturn all that. So it can't help him. And so that is my answer to that question. That is truly the final question of this podcast. So we are going to have more incredible content later this week. Mailbag is going to be on a different day. It's going to be on Thursday because Wednesday is Juneteenth, and I have a Juneteenth special column that will be published on that day. And we're going to have, so the schedule for this week going to be slightly different. It's going to be highly respected Monday, like today. Column tomorrow, column Wednesday, Juneteenth column Wednesday, mailbag Thursday, IQ supplement Friday. So just a slight change. Hopefully people don't revolt. They're like, no, I want my mailbag Wednesday. I think most people will accept this. So we're still going to have content Wednesday. It's just going to be different content. So that is it for Highly Respected. Today, we're going to have more incredible content in the future. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.